Well, hey there, I'm Sully, and welcome into the Gun Club. Now, tonight we've got a live stream running, and I've got this actually keyed off on two platforms. I'm running it both on live on Rumble as well as on YouTube, which, well, as you all know, I have to be a little bit careful what I say on YouTube, but being the fact we're doing legals and stuff tonight, I figured I'd be pretty safe. And on the other side of the coin, I was like, well, this is kind of important information. It's something I want to share out to as many people as I possibly can. And so therefore I figured I'd run it on both sides and just, take the risk and try to be good. We all know how well that works for me sometimes if you don't know me, but I'm going to try to be at least as professional as I can for the most part. That being said, if you want to find out more about any of this stuff, you all have my information. You've got my email address. I'll be putting it up later. Just remember, keep in mind, we do some of our videos on YouTube. We do some of our videos as dual streams, but our biggest library is kept up on Rumble. And that's just because, honestly, there are a few things YouTube doesn't want me to do on a live show, especially handling firearms and or dealing with different things or taking something downrange. And I understand that. I respect their desires. But when we're doing legals, especially important legals, I figured I can share it on both platforms for the night. So, you're going to give a few minutes here, let people come on in and chat. I see we've got a couple watching so far. We'll see how that picks up here in the next couple of minutes. I know the notifications have gone out. The stream seemed to be live on both platforms, and that's great. It's what we need to see. Let's see here. I'll also say that planning on doing another live Back to Basics on Monday of this coming week. Started trying to go back and forth with the Back to Basics sometimes and something a little bit higher end or a little bit more complex, on the Friday show. Again, just pretty much, different audiences. We have over 1 million people who are brand new gun owners. And from that standpoint, we're trying to give them something they can learn from. But the people who have been out there, have been carrying a gun for 40 years, they may not want to hear the back to basic stuff. So they may want something a little bit more advanced, a little bit more technical. And hey, constitutional carry was definitely a real interesting topic for that one. I can say that honestly. For those of y'all who have heard about constitutional carry, there's a lot of it in the news these days. We hear it in the news, we hear it different sources, and we have to get to the point of what is constitutional carry. Okay, simplest version. Excuse me. Simplest version for constitutional carry. Basically, permitless carry, constitutional carry. The state passes a law stating that you no longer require a permit to carry a firearm. For example, I have a CWP or concealed weapons permit that was issued by the state. In order to get that, I had to pay money, take a class, had to go out to the range, demonstrate basic proficiency and safety, then had to pass a written test, got all my paperwork, sent that, got my fingerprints, sent it all into the state, and got it back, my little permit to carry. Cool. Now, the concept of constitutional carry states that any one of those steps is conceivably an infringement on my right to keep and carry arms. If we think at fundamental level, I had to pay money for a right that's guaranteed in the Constitution. I had to go to a class for a right that's guaranteed in the Constitution. I had to get fingerprints done for a right that's guaranteed in the Constitution. I had to apply for a right that's guaranteed in the Constitution. Now, it wasn't particularly arduous or particularly difficult. I will say, when I went through my class, my instructor was very good. He did his best to keep it pretty interesting. He did talk to us in the beginning of class and ask us about our prior experience. And when he heard that I had been former law enforcement many years ago in another state, he sort of, rolled his eyes and smiled. And I said, "It's a good, I understand." And he got me on one of the breaks and he kind of apologized and said, "Dude, I can tell you're dying." And I'm like, "Oh no, I just worked last night. I'm fine. Don't worry. I understand you've got to cover what you've got to cover." And as now someone who is a CWP instructor in the state, South Carolina State Law Enforcement outlines what I will cover in the class to make sure that everyone who is carrying has this information. But was that an infringement on my rights? Well, it required several hours of my time. It required cost, not only to go out and provide ammunition for qualification, but also cost for the class, the cost to get the fingerprints done, the cost to send it all in. So now I had to actually pay to exercise a constitutional right. So you'll hear a lot of people talk about constitutional carry or permitless carry. And I know South Carolina is currently in consideration of it. And it's interesting when we look at it because there's actually many states that have either considered it or gone ahead with it on the big scope of things. Constitutional carry right now is accepted at some level in about 25, 26 different states. Now, it's hard to come up with a specific number because various states are changing. Various states have different laws where they call it permitless carry, constitutional carry. Some states, such as Vermont, has never had a permit whatsoever to require a permit requirement to ever carry. They never had a CWP permit. They considered the Second Amendment of the Constitution to be the only permit you needed. Okay, fair enough. I can see where they're going. On the other side of the coin, other states that have required either permits or classes or training or different things like that, they've come around. Interesting to note, I now have a list of the states that have constitutional carry. And if you live in one of these states, please understand that just because I cite this state here doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% constitutional carry. In reading some of the state laws, there were some interesting caveats in some of them. Some had constitutional carry as of 18 years of age. They said you're a legal adult. You can buy a house, you can buy a car, you can sign your name to join the military, you can do all sorts of wonderful things. Why can't you carry a gun? That's part of adulthood, so to speak. Great. Okay, fine. That works for them. Other states say, okay, they can carry without a permit at 21. Okay, that's their choice. Some have constitutional carry only for residents of that state. It was really interesting as I researched this. North Dakota, hey, they've got constitutional carry, but they require you be a resident of North Dakota for at least 1 year prior to having your constitutional carry. Okay. So the day you move there, you can't, but a year later, you can. And again, there's different flavors throughout the different states. Many of the states that have gone into constitutional carry have actually decreased the crime rate significantly. Not all of them, but many. It's interesting to note the first state that went constitutional carry, Vermont, like I said, always has been. Alaska, back in 2003, they noticed a significant decrease in violent crimes and also murder as a result. So, interesting test case. If it worked in Alaska, why don't we try it in a few other states? Well, lo and behold, we did. They brought it in Arizona in 2010, Kansas 2015, Maine right along then 2015. By 2016, several more states jumped in. Mississippi did permit not required for open carry in 2013 and then went constitutional carry in 2016. Now that was very interesting to me. And they said that when they went open carry with no permit in 2013, that was working out fine, and a man should no longer, and I quote, have to pay a tax for the mere act of wearing a jacket, because again, he'd have to apply for a permit, go through classes or different things like that. By basic federal law, if you are a prohibited possessor, you cannot have a firearm. However, if you're not a prohibited possessor, well, you can have one in your house, but not in your car. You can have one in your house, but not on your person. You can have one in your house, but not where you work. Well, in constitutional carry states, if you can have one in your house, you can have one anywhere else, pretty much, with few limitations, schools, churches, that type of thing. But that's what we get where it gets a little complicated. In looking through the 20, 25 different states that have constitutional carry, basically stating that, hey, anyone who wants to can, okay, fine, more power to them. And I think that's great. There are a couple of downsides that we see come out of that, though, and that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit tonight. The arguments for it, again, the license, the cost of the class, the cost of everything you have to do. Again, I had to spend a day of my life to get permission from the state to exercise a constitutional right. I had to spend a day out of my life to get permission from the state, had to spend money, had to get out to the range, had to do all these things. Some people say, well, hold on, time out. Maybe having training is a good thing. Maybe, I don't want just anybody on their 21st birthday running around willy-nilly with a firearm. Okay, and I can sort of see where their point is. However, anyone on their 21st birthday can run down to the gun store, buy a gun. As long as they're carrying it on their property, they can run around willy-nilly with it. If they're on private property, they can run around willy-nilly with it. So if they go out hunting, they can run around willy-nilly with it. Does carrying it to the grocery store make it that much more dangerous? Well, unless we're having a massive amount of shootings in people's houses, because again, that 21-year-old can purchase it, but he just can't carry it. He's got to go through all the loopholes. Now, in some states, they even require you to take a class for the mere act of buying a firearm. I don't know if I agree with that. I can understand the concept, and I think it makes good sense on the surface. On the other side of the coin, when you consider the fact that we are dealing with a constitutional right, the question I would ask that state if I was sitting down with their legislature, do you have to take a class to have the right of free speech? Do you have to take a class to have the right of freedom to assemble? Do you have to take a class for the right of freedom of religion? Do you have to pass a written test for the mere right to vote? Let's face it, we can have people go and vote these days. They don't even know who the candidates are half the time. But that's their right. We wouldn't take that right away from them. It would be kind of crazy if we said, well, you now have to go take a one-day class and send the state $50. Otherwise, you don't have a right to vote. Boy, that could be interesting. Then again, it might do some real damage to some of the poorly informed voters we have out there. Imagine having to actually be able to pass a written test on the Constitution to be able to vote. People would be up in arms. The right to vote, it's a civil right. You can't take someone's rights away. But yet, the right to keep and bear arms is behind all these hurdles, these hoops you got to jump through. So I see the sides of the pros for constitutional carry. I really do. Now, there are some cons to constitutional carry. One of the most often cited one is, we'll have blood in the streets. There'll be shooting every weekend. There'll be gun battles on Main Street. In looking at the list of states that has constitutional carry here, Arizona, Kansas, Maine, West Virginia, Idaho, that's residents only, Mississippi, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Dakota after a year of residence, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Arkansas, Utah, Montana, Iowa, Tennessee, Texas. Looking at all those, is there blood flowing in the street from all these people shooting it up every weekend, every night? Are we having all these murders that we weren't having before? In several states, like I said, the crime rate has dropped significantly. Now I come back to, what would the con be? Well, everyone's going to be running around with guns. Well, they can run around with guns now. It just takes a little bit more work to get there. Other classes, though, as a CWP instructor, do I think we should require a class? Boy, mixed emotions. Overall, I don't think at the fundamental legal level, you should be required to take a class to exercise your constitutional rights. Other side of that coin, given some of the questions I've had in some of my classes, I'm kind of glad we do. Do I think, though, that that class is beneficial to everybody? Or is the class maybe beneficial to the lower, 20% who really have absolutely no experience with firearms? And I think those 20% may get a benefit, but the other 80% are having to take that class too, and they're having to pay for it. So, I mean, imagine having to, again, go out and get a license to ride your bicycle. Well, that would be a little bit difficult. It would be a big hassle. It would be a lot of paperwork. The state would have to write a curriculum. We'd have to have people to teach it, all this stuff. Now, again, might help some people, but the amount of people it helps versus the amount of people it infringes on, where do we stand? Constitutional carry is the very simple as saying at 21, you can go buy a gun, you can go buy bullets. In most states, and I say that Illinois does have that weird basic firearms owner ID card, and I'm not a big fan of it, but okay. That's amazing. Illinois has some of the most restrictive laws. You've got to go take a basic class to merely purchase a firearm. Yeah. Is it helping with crime? Honestly, I feel safer here in South Carolina, where any 21-year-old can go up and buy a handgun or an AR or a shotgun, than I would in Illinois, where you have to have a firearms owner's ID card. Who's got the higher murder rate? Is it working? It's not. I don't think it's stopping the murders. I don't think most active murderers, active killers, people who are doing violent stuff on a regular basis, they've never struck me as being the most by the book, going to jump through the loophole kind of people. Law-abiding citizens are the ones who have to go through the cost and the effort and the drama to get this. So with all that being said, constitutional carry. I've heard the negatives. I've listened to the negatives, and I've tried to be very empathetic to the negatives. One argument that was made, and I thought this had some merit to a point, is, well, you wouldn't give somebody the keys to a car with absolutely no driver's ed on their 18th birthday, would you? No, probably wouldn't, and I can understand that. But on the other side of the coin, we don't do it now, and look at the car wrecks we see. Is driver's ed really helping that much? I mean, maybe it is, but what do we hear from young drivers are some of the worst? But they've just come from driver's ed. So is driver's ed really preventing it? So when you look at, what helps, what doesn't help, I don't know. I will say this. If we had constitutional carry, it would be a lot easier for law-abiding citizens to be able to carry when and where they needed to. Now, again, there would be a degree of responsibility foisted on them. And when I say foisted, okay, maybe I'm being a little bit overly dramatic, but is it really foisted on them? Well, think about this. If there was no such thing as a permit requirement, chances are there would not be many CWP classes. Now, having been very familiar with firearms when I moved here from another state, I can honestly say that I did not learn a whole lot or get a whole lot out of my CWP class that I took. Yes, the legals was good and the legals were interesting, and it was, definitely good to learn what the rules were about deadly force and non-deadly force and everything else. But did I need somebody to sit there and pick up and say, this is the trigger, this is the back sight, this is the front sight, this is the hammer spur, this is the grip, this is the back strap, this is the front strap, this is the magazine, this is how you pull it out? I mean, I learned it maybe a little bit when we did the legal section on the basic parts of the firearm, or the 4 rules of firearm safety. I knew that walking in the door. I mean, I knew enough at least when I walked in the door that I knew the difference between a magazine and a clip. And even some people who have CWP can't figure that out these days. So, again, is constitutional carry the way to go? I don't know, although I do feel that it could be a positive thing. However, what happens if we do go to constitutional carry? I know in South Carolina they're looking at it. I know in Florida they're looking very strongly at it. Now, the last time it was up in South Carolina at our state legislature, unfortunately, it did not pass. They did pass at that time doing away with the permitting fee to get our CWP permits, so that was a positive. And they did begin allowing open carry, which they had not before, so that was a winner. I'll take that. So I was happy with what they did accomplish. I wish they got more, but okay, they didn't. But now, let's say we do away with needing a permit. Anyone who's 21 can go out and carry a gun. Let's say you live in a state that is either A, been constitutional carry forever, or goes constitutional carry. What does that do by proxy? And there is an unintended consequence here that sort of happens in the background. If permits were not required in South Carolina, would we still have CWP classes at all? Well, I mean, we might be able to do that. I don't think there'd be as much demand for it as we have now. That might be a little bit bad for my business, but CWP and concealed carry stuff is not my primary business, believe me. Actually, it's EMS education. But what about if somebody wanted to take a class? Let's go out and look at, John Q. Public. Let's say John Q. Public was raised up in, New York City or Long Island, and John Q. Public hadn't grown up around firearms. And John Q. Public didn't even know how to properly load and chamber a round. Let's say John Q. Public couldn't pick a magazine from a clip at all. Would these classes still be accessible to him? What would he do, or what would we recommend he do to become properly functional to go out and carry a gun on Main Street? I mean, let's face it, would we want the first time he ever fired or discharged a weapon to be in a crowded parking lot? Would he know enough to choose or not to choose to use his weapon? Would he know the legal situation surrounding it? I mean, let's face it, the only thing out there in the world that has more laws written about it than firearms is automobiles. And we have to go to school to learn the rules of the road for that. Think about it. The last time the power went out or a traffic light went out near your house, four-way traffic light that's out, it's supposed to be a four-way stop sign and we all take turns. We can't figure that out. Honestly, there are some people who seem to have trouble figuring out roundabouts. Now, in Europe, they seem to be fine with them. But I've seen people go clean through a roundabout or not know how to manage a roundabout. So driver's ed. Okay. But gun ed. Would we have people teaching basic classes on the laws of the state? How would you do it? Would you want to do it? Well, let's go one step further. Constitutional carry goes through. No one needs CWP classes anymore. Anyone who's legally not permitted or prohibited, can go out and buy a gun. Cool, more power to them. And they choose to go out and get this gun. Cool, more power to them. And they choose to carry the gun. I mean, let's face it, crime's gotten pretty crazy these days. I read some of these statistics and you'd be surprised what I see come across. So I can totally understand them wanting to protect themselves, protect their family. Not a problem in the world. But there's only one little hookup that comes in. They've gone ahead and they've gotten this gun, but they don't know when you can and cannot use deadly force. They don't know when you can and cannot pull the gun out. They're not familiar with the term brandishing. They're not familiar with the term of imminent deadly threat. They don't know the alter ego law. I mean, let's face it, there's a few laws that kind of have to be covered in the class. Now, when I teach my students concealed carry, and I do periodically, again, it's not something I do a lot. I'd rather be streaming on here and chatting and talking guns and see what we can hear out there. But when you look at the fact of, hey, look, this person gets a brand new gun, or get it, life's wonderful, life's fantastic. Yeah, but he doesn't know the rules surrounding it. Now, whose responsibility is that? If it was no longer a requirement for any kind of class training or anything else, just because it's not required, does it mean we shouldn't do it? I'll be honest with you. Like I said, if I move to a new state, for some reason I decide I want to move up to Vermont. Guess what? I'm going to be pretty intent on getting some paperwork and learning what Vermont's laws are. I like my freedom because that's great. We don't need a permit to carry. Okay. So if you don't need a permit, fine. You don't know the rules of the road or the rules of carrying outside, and you make an oops. Now, an oops can be something simple, it can be something minor. Um, what's the law in your state or in my state about notifying a law enforcement officer if you're pulled over? Most states have different versions of it. South Carolina, I have to, when an officer asks for my license or for my ID, I have to, if I'm carrying, provide him a copy of my permit also and inform him of what I'm carrying and where. Now, if I'm not carrying, I don't have to talk permit, don't have to get into anything. But if I fail to do that, I've committed a crime. Okay? If we're constitutional, does anyone know that? Is there anyone going to be able to tell these people that? Or are they going to be walking into pitfalls? And that's why, again, yes, I support constitutional carry. Great, fine, wonderful. I also think, as a responsible firearms owner, and this is where it gets to be a big deal, we need to be hyper aware and hyper vigilant of what the laws are in our state, and to complicate it further, any state we choose to travel to. Huh? Okay. I live in South Carolina, right near the border of North Carolina. I have friends who ride motorcycles. South Carolina does not have a helmet law. No helmet requirement in South Carolina. However, if you cross over into North Carolina, motorcyclists are required to wear helmets. So if you're riding along on your bike and you're having a great evening and you decide, it's so nice, I think I'm going to go up to the mountain and enjoy the sunset up there, guess what? If you cross North Carolina and you're not wearing a helmet, the boys in blue are behind you. Okay, how about if I'm carrying something that's perfectly legal here that has a 13-round magazine, and I cross over into a state that has a 10-round magazine limit? So I not only have to know the laws here, but in any state that I can possibly travel to. A couple years ago, right during the heat of the pandemic, I was going out to Las Vegas, and I was going out to meet a friend, and then I was going to drive back and help them get their car and their dog moved back east. Okay. We figured out what route we were going to take on the way back, and I looked through and researched the firearms laws in all of those states. Now, good thing, South Carolina had a CWP permit. Cool. My permit was accepted by all of those states. I made sure of that. What if it wasn't? Well, I might have had some issues. There's ways around it, but a lot of the time, you have to make sure that whatever state you go into will take the permit from your home state or what other permits you have. Some people have 2 or 3 different permits from different states because someone doesn't accept someone's permit. It gets really complicated. Now, if someone doesn't go through a CWP class, would they know this? Would they have that South Carolina permit? Because think about it. Make it a little bit fun. I'm coming back. Because I had my South Carolina permit, I was good in all those states. What would we be saying if I did not have a South Carolina permit because South Carolina went totally permitless constitutional carry? I wouldn't have had a South Carolina permit, so I would have been illegal in most of the states I was in. Now, interesting to note, North Carolina accepts South Carolina's permit for reciprocity. North Carolina also used to have open carry without a permit while I was there. So if you have a South Carolina permit to carry concealed, you can carry concealed or open. You can also go to North Carolina and carry concealed or open there based on your South Carolina permit. However, if you don't have either one, North Carolina or South Carolina permit, you can't carry concealed in North Carolina, but you can carry open. The laws are technical. Go ahead. accidentally leave a gun on your belt and go to pick up stamps to mail your wife's Christmas cards. Well, what was that? You went into a federal facility with a firearm on your belt? Oh, so you just committed a federal felony under 18 USC. And the reason I bring all this up isn't to sit and play Jeopardy or brain teaser, although some of these could be really good Jeopardy questions. I say this because even if your state goes totally no permit, no nothing, 21 and up, if you're not prohibited, you can carry anything you want. You need to know the laws. You need to be educated. You need to be familiar with what you can and cannot do with a firearm. So whether you take a class, whether you go to a school, a seminar, or if you just sit down and read the state law books. I mean, nowadays, I won't say books. You can probably Google most of it, or there's an app for that. But you'd have to read all those laws and understand them. Whereas, if you're in my class, we go through South Carolina's laws very well. I actually ask people in my class, is there anyone who has a question about any surrounding states? One of my students raised a hand. He says, I've got a lot of family up in Boston. I fly up to Boston periodically. How would I, do that? I looked at Massachusetts gun laws, and as restrictive as they were, I said, I'd leave my gun home. And he said, you can't carry it? I said, well, first of all, they won't accept your South Carolina permit. And the mere act of saying gun in that state, you probably get pulled over. It's not worth it. Now, when I was going out to Vegas, all the states I was coming back to were good. I made sure of it. Actually, printed out copies of their laws. I knew what I was dealing with in every state. And this is just where you can and cannot carry. Let's take it a step further. When you can and cannot use lethal force, when you can and cannot draw your weapon. If you're not sure what's legal and what's not, how close can you be to having an oops and carrying it in the wrong place, in your pocket at the post office, whatever the case may be, because, well, no one told you anything. And so if we come to constitutional carry, or if you live in a constitutional carry state now, like I said, there's over 25 of them, I urge you, if you didn't take a class, you didn't have to do anything, that's fine. I get it. The Second Amendment is the only permit you need, and I totally get that. But time out for a second. Look at what you've got as far as liability for an oops, so to speak, if you carry it in a place you're not allowed. Look at the possibility for an oops if you carry it in a manner you're not allowed. Look at the manner for an oops for, going into crossing over a state line, going into a state where you can't carry it. A lot of problems in there. I don't want anyone to have their gun confiscated and melted down, nor do I want them to spend a bunch of time in jail because they did something that was perfectly fine in their state and a big deal in one next door. And yes, we've seen people charged for accidentally crossing into a gun-free state with a firearm. I don't think that's right by any stretch of the imagination, but what I think is right versus the world we live in, unfortunately, they've not made me ruler of the world yet, so I'm kind of limited to what I can do. Now, where would we get all this information? What do we need to do to come up with this information? Well, there's actually a few good places. I'm going to mention a few of them here because, quite frankly, I want to be able to not only give you information and resources, but I want to point you in a direction of where you can find more. And trust me, in some cases, there's a lot more to find out. I've got here is a list, and I printed this up. Pull myself out of frame here. Put this together as a general list of some of the different options you have to deal with either a legal situation involving a firearm or a self-defense situation or where you can and cannot carry. I know it did a great job on my drip, so we look at this on the top line there, we see the law of self-defense. Now, I mentioned them online resources. That's one of my favorite resources for reviews of actual shootings and lethal force encounters. But in addition to that, Mr. Bronca, Andrew Bronca, the attorney there, who founded the company, who runs the organization, although he doesn't do direct client representation, he actually does travel around the country consulting with attorneys who have clients in self-defense cases. Boy, would I like his opinion on the self-defense laws of my state. He actually makes and sells videos, and I'll show you this one here. This is South Carolina, one of the South Carolina versions. But you can see on there, it is actually the South Carolina supplement. Don't know if I can get it to focus real well. But we've got the Law of Self-Defense South Carolina supplement. Now, why would I want that? Well, I live in South Carolina. Now, I teach this stuff, but even teaching this stuff, I want to hear his version of the laws. And if I was going to be moving to, say, Kentucky, and I don't know anything about their laws, I do know that, hey, they've got the constitutional carry since 3 of 2019. What does it mean? What are the restrictions on it? Anything else? I'd be getting on their website and ordering the Kentucky video pretty quickly to find out what I need to do. What about if I lived in, let's say Vermont, who doesn't offer any CWP stuff? So because they don't have a need for a permit, there's actually not a curriculum, there's no class, I'd get in touch with, say, maybe the USCCA up there on the top, or the National Rifle Association on the right side. How come? Well, it's kind of our freedom and kind of our ability to go home, so I need to probably know what I'm doing with the gun. Even if you don't make me take driver's ed, I probably will. Even if you don't make me learn what all this stuff is, I probably will. Because the last thing I want to do is do something that I think is perfectly legal, and the police show up and say, "You did what? Nope, can't do that here. Give me your gun, take it away, and go to jail." Now, there's a couple of state groups I messed up on there. Palmetto Gun Rights, Florida Gun Rights. They're actually part of the National Association for Gun Rights. But again, there's South Carolina and Florida both currently considering going no permit required or constitutional carry. If you live in those states, you may be able to contact those organizations and say, look, I need to find out what the legals are. Because no matter how great you are with a firearm, you come out of that situation, either it's a lethal force encounter, shoot, don't shoot, whatever. Once you've drawn your firearm, you realize you could be considered brandishing. Now, if you're brandishing a firearm, that can be arrestable in some states. But what is the law on brandishing in your state? So, law of self-defense, state-by-state information. The state gun rights organizations, whether it's Palmetto or Florida, just choose those two. Now, over on the right there, we see the USCCA and the NRA. They're, I won't say necessarily twin organizations, but they're both somewhat involved legislatively, and in many cases, you'll see them being a great resource for information. Quite frankly, she can do a lot with underwater mining that I'm surprised she hasn't gone somewhere yet, or gone to Navy, or gone somewhere great and wonderful, or go to the military, because honestly, you have to know all the laws in all the states. Now, CCW Safe, they're mostly a lethal force defense company or insurance company, but hang on. They also have a bunch of online training in firearms basics, firearm safety. Now, you pay for it, but on the other side of that coin, if you pay for it, but it saves you an attorney's fee, what's the going rate nowadays for a self-defense case? Pretty much generally about 200,000 and up. You'll probably start your attorney's first retainer will be probably 10 to 20,000. And that's if you have a pretty good airtight case. What if it's a judgment case? What if they have to call in experts? What if your attorney wants to call in Mr. Bronca? How does that add up fast? Why are we there? Because we don't know the law. So, in closing, I will say this: I'm all for exercising our constitutional rights, and I support people who endeavor to do that. I will do anything I can to help them out doing that. However, even if you're in a state that doesn't require a permit, get in the habit of, going to a firearms class at least every year or two. How come? Because you'll know the laws by which you'll be judged. If you have copies of the law books that you can access, whether it's off the internet or actually flipping through the old school book, how much can that save you on judgment time? Because yes, you survived the fight and you survived the mugging or the attack or the person jumping you. Hey, great, wonderful. I'm glad you did. Unfortunately, law enforcement is now putting you in cuffs, and you're going to have to put your house up for a bond to get out of jail. And the case isn't looking really good because of the fact that you overstepped the bounds where they're outlined by law. And you say, but Your Honor, I didn't know. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. Responsible gun owners need to know the laws in their states and the states they travel to. We've got USCCA up there. Great app. Their app has not only lots of gun information on all the states, all the different nitpicks on it, it also, and this is one of the big ones I love, takes the little Phillips torque bits. Alrighty, well, that's all I've got for this evening. It was kind of a quickie. I look forward to seeing you back on Monday. If you're looking for a great cup of coffee, I'll definitely recommend you check out our friends over at coffeebrandcoffee.com. They've got a promo code with us. Definitely support them. They're always great about supporting us. I love their coffee. I've been drinking it all day today. Actually, went out to the range today, got a little bit of recoil therapy in, which was very well needed. And I'm going to be doing another live stream on Monday. Now, Mondays probably be a Rumble exclusive just because of the fact that we may be bringing a couple of firearms on stream, maybe doing something like that, whereby YouTube may not really appreciate my choice of, show and tell display toys or things like that. But that's okay because, I'm sure Rumble won't mind me streaming up on here. Beyond that, let me know what you want to see. Drop me an email. I put the Facebook group up so I can announce streams more in advance. I'm going to try to be shooting for about 2 streams a week. Ideally, in the perfect world, we'll be doing a back to basics stream once a week and a more advanced, more in-depth legals once a week. So from that standpoint, if again something specific you have an interest in or you want someone to cover, let me know. I'll be happy to do it. Y'all take care, and please take care of yourself out there. Bye.